December 2, 1966, over Phuc Yen Airfield, North Vietnam, 14:27 hours. Major Nguyen Van Kock banked his MiG-17 into a steep climb, the afternoon sun glinting off his canopy as he tracked the American formation through broken clouds at 15,000 feet. Below him, the Red River snaked toward Hanoi, its muddy waters reflecting the chaos of another rolling thunderstrike package headed for the Paul Doomer Bridge. Koch had 47 combat sorties under his belt and 7 aerial victories. The Americans called him an ace. 2 bandits, 11 o'clock high. His wingman radioed, the big ones, F-4s. Cosi smiled inside his oxygen mask, the F-4 Phantom. American propaganda called it a technological marvel, a fighter that didn't even need guns, just missiles that could kill from beyond visual range. But Koch and his fellow pilots in the Vietnam People's Air Force had watched these massive machines lumbering through the sky like pregnant water buffalo. 28 tons at takeoff weight, twin engines that announced their presence with black smoke trails visible for 30 kilometers. The Americans had strapped so much metal and electronics onto these beasts that they'd forgotten the first rule of air combat. If you can't turn inside your enemy, you're already dead. Arm cannon, Koch ordered, checking his 3 23mm and single 37mm gun switches. The MiG-17 was a relic by American standards, subsonic, Korean War vintage, powered by a single Klimov engine that pushed his fighter to barely Mach 0.93. Yet it could turn on a coin. At low altitude, below 10,000 feet where the Phantom's sophisticated radar became cluttered with ground return, the MiG-17 ruled absolutely. What Koch didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that he was about to witness the beginning of an education. The F-4 Phantom wasn't clumsy. It was learning. And within 18 months, the skies over North Vietnam would belong to it in ways that would rewrite everything the Vietnamese pilots thought they knew about air combat. When the F-4 Phantom II first deployed to Southeast Asia in 1964, North Vietnamese intelligence officers compiled dossiers that read like anatomy textbooks for a beast, 63 feet long, 38-foot wingspan, maximum takeoff weight approaching 60,000 pounds. For pilots trained in the nimble, gun-armed traditions of Soviet doctrine, the specifications seemed almost laughable. When we first saw technical drawings of the F-4, some of our instructors called it MiG-17, the crazy American, recalled Colonel Nguyen Hat Chieu, who commanded fighter operations from Gia Lam Airfield in 1965. They had created a fighter with no internal gun. They claimed their missiles could kill from 10, 20 kilometers away. We thought, let them try. We will get close, and then their size will kill them. This dismissal wasn't born from arrogance alone. The North Vietnamese People's Air Force flew primarily MiG-17s and MiG-21s, aircraft that embodied fundamentally different combat philosophies. The MiG-17 Fresco weighed just 11,173 pounds fully loaded and could sustain 6.5 G turns that would black out most pilots. Its 3 23mm cannons and single 37mm gun were brutal in close combat. The aircraft was designed for exactly the kind of turning, burning, close-range furballs that Soviet tacticians believed would define modern air combat. The Americans had chosen a different path entirely. The F-4 epitomized Defense Secretary Robert McNamara's vision of technology-driven warfare. McDonnell Aircraft had designed it as an interceptor for the U.S. Navy, optimized for beyond visual range missile combat against Soviet bombers. Its AN/APQ-72 pulse Doppler radar could detect targets at 70 nautical miles. Its primary weapons, AIM-7 Sparrow and AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles, promised to revolutionize air combat by killing enemies before they knew they were being hunted. The F-4 represented everything we believed about the future of warfare, explained General John C. Meyer, who commanded 12th Air Force during the Vietnam escalation. Sophisticated avionics, long-range missiles, high-speed and altitude performance. We genuinely believed the era of the dogfight was over. But beneath this confidence, warning signs multiplied. The rules of engagement imposed by Washington prohibited firing on enemy aircraft until they were visually identified, negating the Phantom's beyond visual range advantage. The AIM-7 Sparrow missile proved temperamental in combat, with reliability rates below 10%. The AIM-9 Sidewinder required the launching aircraft to maneuver behind the target, exactly where the MiG-17's superior turn rate gave it an advantage. By mid-1966, we were hearing stories, recalled Captain Richard Stephen Ritchie, who would later become the only Air Force ace of the war. F-4 crews coming back saying the MiGs were getting inside their turns, guys complaining about missile failures. Some crews were even requesting guns. Can you imagine? The North Vietnamese, meanwhile, were learning to exploit the Phantom's weaknesses. Fight below 10,000 feet, where ground clutter degraded American radar. Force close-range engagements where the MiG-17's guns outmatched missiles. Use ground-controlled intercept stations to vector fighters toward American formations, and execute hit-and-run attacks on bomb-laden strike packages before F-4 escorts could respond. By late 1966, American air-to-air kill ratios had declined to barely 2.1, far below the 10-1 or 12.1 achieved in Korea. The Americans had built a thoroughbred racehorse. The North Vietnamese flew pit bulls, and both sides were about to discover which breed would survive. The F-4 Phantom II's journey to Vietnam began in the sterile conference rooms of the Pentagon and the windswept deck of USS Independence in 1960. McDonnell Aircraft had designed the F-4H as a fleet defense interceptor, a mission utterly different from the close-range knife fights that would define its Vietnam experience. The Navy's requirement was brutally simple: detect and destroy Soviet bomber formations before they could launch anti-ship missiles at carrier battle groups. This demanded speed, powerful radar, and long-range missiles. Maneuverability was secondary. Gun armament was deemed unnecessary. McDonnell delivered precisely what the Navy requested. By 1965, as President Lyndon Johnson authorized Operation Rolling Thunder against North Vietnam, the F-4 Phantom had become America's primary air superiority fighter in Southeast Asia. The 12th Tactical Fighter Wing arrived at Cam Ranh Bay in November 1965. The 8th TFW deployed to Ubon Royal Thai Air Force Base in December 1965. But the aircraft that arrived in Southeast Asia carried assumptions that would prove dangerously flawed. Phantom crews trained primarily for beyond visual range intercepts using Sparrow missiles. Dogfighting tactics, officially considered obsolete, were taught perfunctorily, if at all. They sent us to Vietnam with maybe 20 hours of air combat maneuvering training, recalled Lieutenant Jerome Bollier, an F-4 pilot with the 433rd Tactical Fighter Squadron. Nobody taught us what to do when a MiG-17 got inside our turn radius at 5,000 feet with all our missiles already expended. We learned that the hard way. The MiG-17, despite its obsolescence, exploited critical Phantom vulnerabilities. Its wing loading of just 51 pounds per square foot versus the F-4's 78 pounds per square foot meant it could sustain turns the Phantom couldn't match, and it operated within an integrated air defense network where ground-controlled intercept stations tracked American formations using early warning radars, then vectored MiG flights to intercept positions. The Americans thought we were backward, explained Colonel Pham Thanh Nguyen, a MiG-17 pilot with 9 confirmed victories. They saw our simple aircraft and assumed simple tactics. But we didn't need sophisticated planes. Our radar stations told us where the Americans were, and once we closed to gun range, their technology meant nothing. The first aerial victories of the war belonged to the North Vietnamese. On April 3, 1965, MiG-17s shot down 2 U.S. Navy F-8 Crusaders. These early encounters established patterns that would persist. North Vietnamese fighters would attack American formations at vulnerable moments, during bomb runs, in bad weather, at low altitude where radar was least effective. By late 1966, as Operation Rolling Thunder intensified, the air war had settled into a brutal pattern. "We called it MiG roulette," said Captain Doyle Pappy Baker. "You never knew when they'd hit you. When they came, it was always at the worst possible moment. When you were low on fuel or weather forced you low, they were smart. They picked their moments." Something had to change. Operation Bolo, January 6, 1967, Colonel Robin Olds stood before his assembled pilots at Ubon Royal Thai Air Force Base on December 28, 1966, with a plan so audacious it bordered on theater. Operation Bolo would deceive the North Vietnamese into believing a standard F-105 strike package was approaching Hanoi. Instead, F-4 Phantoms would masquerade as F-105s, using identical flight profiles, altitudes, airspeeds, and radio call signs. When MiG-21s scrambled to attack what they believed were vulnerable bomb-laden Thunder Chiefs, they would encounter F-4s armed, ready, and hungry for a fight. "Gentlemen," Olds told his crews, "we're going to make the enemy think he's getting an easy kill. Then we're going to teach him why the Phantom isn't clumsy. It's just been fighting stupid." Olds had arrived in Vietnam as a World War II ace with 12 kills against the Luftwaffe. He'd immediately recognized that American tactics were fundamentally flawed. Bolo represented his solution: aggressive, innovative tactics that used deception to create advantageous engagements. On January 2, 1967, 7 flights of F-4Cs, 28 aircraft total, crossed into North Vietnam in 15-minute intervals, mimicking typical strike packages. Weather was marginal. Solid cloud decks from 5,000 to 15,000 feet. At 14:45 hours, Olds' Ford flight crossed into North Vietnam north of the Black River. North Vietnamese GCI stations immediately detected the formation. To radar operators, the profile looked exactly like F-105 Thunder Chiefs. MiG-21 pilots scrambled, expecting easy prey. At 1500 hours, Olds pushed through the cloud deck at 14,000 feet. His radar intercept officer, First Lieutenant Charles Clifton, immediately called contacts. Multiple bandits, 12 o'clock, 20 miles, closing. The MiG-21s had no idea they were flying into an ambush. Olds' flight, music on, Olds transmitted, code for arming weapons. His Phantom's radar locked onto the lead MiG-21 at 18 miles. At 12 miles, Olds fired an AIM-7 Sparrow. 8 seconds later, the missile detonated. The MiG-21 disintegrated in a fireball. "Splash one," Clifton called. 3 more MiG-21s burst through the clouds ahead. The lead pilot broke hard left, exactly the wrong tactic. The MiG-21, optimized for high-speed intercepts, bled energy catastrophically in hard turns below 20,000 feet. Olds pushed his throttles forward, rolled inverted, and pulled through into a diving right turn. At 8,000 feet, he fired a Sidewinder. The missile tracked perfectly. The MiG pilot ejected as his aircraft tumbled earthward, trailing fire and smoke. The engagement lasted 14 minutes. When the last Phantom departed North Vietnamese airspace, 7 MiG-21s had been destroyed, half the operational inventory at Phuc Yen, for 0 American losses. "After Bolo, everything changed," recalled Captain John Stone, who flew in the operation's second wave. We realized the bird wasn't the problem. Our tactics were. The Phantom could win, but you had to fight smart. Use your radar. Keep your speed up. Don't try to turn with MiGs at low altitude. Fight the plane's fight, not theirs. The MiG-17 problem persists. Yet even as Bolo decimated the MiG-21 force, the MiG-17 remained deadly. 3 weeks later, on January 24, 1967, Major Nguyen Van Kock intercepted an F-4C at 6,000 feet. The American crew never saw Kock's MiG-17 approach from low 6 o'clock. Kock's 37mm cannon fire shredded the Phantom's port engine. Both crewmen ejected, beginning 7 years as prisoners of war. The wake-up call came on April 30, 1967, during a strike against Hanoi railway yards. Captain Larry Kerrigan engaged 2 MiG-17s at 8,000 feet. Both Sparrow missiles failed. Kerrigan maneuvered for a sidewinder shot, but the MiG-17 pilot reversed hard, forcing him into a scissors maneuver. Kerrigan made a critical error. He attempted to match the MiG's turn radius rather than using vertical maneuvers. Within 3 reversals, the F-4's speed decayed to 280 knots. The Phantom's controls became mushy. Its vulnerability increased exponentially. The MiG-17 pilot pulled vertical, then rolled inverted and pulled through into a diving attack. His cannons had a perfect firing solution. Kerrigan's aircraft absorbed multiple hits. Both crew ejected successfully, but another Phantom had fallen to a supposedly obsolete fighter. By mid-1967, American losses had become unacceptable. Analysis revealed disturbing patterns. 60% of Sparrow shots were failing. Sidewinder reliability remained below 25%. F-4 crews were consistently outperformed in close-range combat. Many pilots lacked adequate training in visual air combat maneuvering. The Navy responded first. In March 1967, the Navy Fighter Weapons School opened at NAS Miramar, soon known as Top Gun. The syllabus emphasized visual combat tactics, energy management, multi-aircraft coordination, and dissimilar air combat training against aircraft simulating Soviet fighters. "We weren't teaching anything revolutionary," recalled Commander Dan Peterson, Top Gun's founder. "Everything we taught was in the manuals. It had just been forgotten or ignored. Energy management, mutual support, using your wingman properly, understanding what your aircraft can and can't do." The Air Force followed suit, establishing the Fighter Weapons School at Nellis Air Force Base. More immediately, combat-experienced pilots like Robin Olds began conducting informal training in Southeast Asia. The tactical changes were specific and profound. Energy management. F-4 crews learned to maintain speed above 400 knots, using the Phantom's superior acceleration to dictate engagement timing. If forced slow, they would extend vertically, trading speed for altitude, then diving to regain energy while creating separation. Mutual support. 2-ship and 4-ship flights practiced welded wing formations, where pairs maintained visual contact and positioned to protect each other. Vertical fighting. Rather than attempting horizontal turns against more maneuverable opponents, F-4 crews used the Phantom's thrust and climb rate to fight vertically, pulling up, rolling over the top, and diving back for firing position. Missile employment. Crews learned optimal firing parameters for both Sparrows and Sidewinders, specific ranges, aspect angles, and target speeds that maximized probability of kill. On August 23, 1967, Major Robert Locker intercepted 4 MiG-17s near Hanoi. Using tactics developed since Bolo, Locker positioned for a high-side attack, diving through the MiG formation. He fired a Sidewinder from 4,500 feet. The missile guided perfectly. The MiG exploded. Locker extended to high altitude, repositioned, dove again, and destroyed a second MiG-17, all while maintaining enough energy to outrun the remaining MiGs. That engagement was textbook. Colonel Olds noted. Locker fought the Phantom's fight. He used speed and surprise. He took his shots from advantage and didn't stick around to dogfight. That's how you beat MiGs in an F-4. The arrival of the F-4E variant in late 1967 added an internal M61A1 Vulcan 20mm cannon. The gun gave us options, explained Captain Richard Ritchie. You're in a close fight, you've fired all your missiles, and there's still a MiG out there. Now you've got 640 rounds of 20mm. The North Vietnamese adapted aggressively. MiG pilots abandoned prolonged engagements, emphasizing single, violent attacks, diving from altitude, firing at close range, then disengaging immediately. The goal wasn't sustained combat, but disruption. Scatter the strike package, force F-105s to jettison bombs prematurely, create chaos. Vietnamese pilots recognized that American radar suffered degradation below 5,000 feet due to ground clutter. MiG-17s began operating at 1,000, 3,000 feet, using terrain to hide from Phantom radar. They would climb only at the last moment to attack, then immediately descend back into radar clutter. Below 3,000 feet, we became invisible to their radar, explained Colonel Nguyen Nhat Chieu. Our GCI would guide us to within 5 kilometers of American formations. Then we would climb rapidly, attack from below, and descend immediately. Yet, despite these adaptations, the balance had shifted decisively. Through 1968-1969, American kill ratios improved dramatically. F-4 crews, now properly trained and tactically refined, consistently outperformed their adversaries. By the time Operation Rolling Thunder halted in November 1968, the F-4 Phantom had fundamentally rewritten the narrative. From November 1965 through November 1968, F-4 crews achieved 107.5 aerial victories against 33 Phantom losses in air-to-air combat, a kill ratio of 3.26.1. The Phantom had evolved from a missile platform flown cautiously into a dominant weapon system operated by crews who understood exactly how to exploit its capabilities. When President Richard Nixon authorized Operation Linebacker 1 in May 1972, the qualitative superiority of American pilots was unmistakable. On May 10, 1972, Captain Richard "Steve" Ritchie scored the operation's first MiG kill. It was the beginning of an extraordinary career that would make Ritchie the only Air Force pilot ace of the war, and his WSO Charles "Chuck" DeBellevue the highest-scoring American ace with 6 victories. On August 28, 1972, Ritchie achieved his 4th and 5th kills in a single mission, both MiG-21s destroyed with Sparrow missiles at ranges exceeding 8 miles. "We knew exactly what we were doing," Ritchie explained. "We'd practiced this thousands of times. By 1972, flying the F-4 against MiGs wasn't guesswork, it was precision." During Linebacker, true May-October 1972, American forces achieved 53 aerial victories against 12 losses, a kill ratio exceeding 4.1. The Phantom, supported by improved missiles, better tactics, and superbly trained crews, had achieved clear dominance. Senior Lieutenant Nguyen Van Kock, who achieved 13 confirmed victories over his career, reflected on the transformation. In 1966, we believed our advantage was our aircraft's maneuverability and our pilots' skill. By 1972, the Americans had learned to negate both. They no longer tried to turn with us. They used their radar, their speed, their missiles. They had become very professional, very dangerous. Yet, for all the Phantom's tactical dominance, its success illuminated a fundamental paradox. Tactical excellence meant nothing without strategic victory. American pilots controlled the skies over North Vietnam. They shot down MiGs at favorable ratios. They achieved air superiority whenever and wherever they fought. None of it mattered strategically. We won every fight. Colonel Robin Olds observed bitterly in retirement. We dominated their Air Force. We flew wherever we wanted, and somehow we still lost the war, because air superiority was never the issue. The issue was political will, strategic objectives, and an enemy who understood that they didn't need to defeat us militarily. They just needed to outlast us politically. The F-4 Phantom's journey from dismissed heavyweight to dominant fighter represents one of military aviation's most significant tactical evolutions. The North Vietnamese dismissal in 1965-1966 wasn't unreasonable. Early Phantom employment was clumsy, wedded to missile-only doctrine that combat quickly disproved. But the transformation from 1967-1972 demonstrated that aircraft capability matters less than tactical sophistication and crew training. The lessons proved enduring. The establishment of Top Gun and Red Flag created institutionalized excellence that influenced American fighter doctrine for decades. The emphasis on dissimilar air combat training, realistic threat replication, and rigorous tactical development became foundational to U.S. air power. For the Vietnamese, the Phantom represented an adversary that learned, adapted, and ultimately exceeded their ability to counter. "We shot down many F-4s," reflected Colonel Nguyen Hat Chieu, "but by the end we feared them. They had become too skilled, too well-trained, too professional." The irony is profound. The F-4 Phantom, initially dismissed as too big and clumsy, became dominant not by changing what it was, but by changing how it fought. The North Vietnamese were wrong about the aircraft, but they were right about early American tactics. The Phantom needed revolution, not in design, but in employment. And when that revolution came, the Dragon learned to fear the Phantom after all.